let's talk again. I've named the title list because you wrote again on your Substack at the weekend. Obviously, the major talking about at the moment, if you kind of pick holes a little bit, is the midfield and in particular the number 6 area. You know, Alexis Mac Allister himself said the other day he probably didn't have his best game. That is the one, again, that's probably the main question mark that's come out of that game. It reared its head a little bit at Wolves as well when, again, different circumstances, Alexis had just flown across the world, but the fact that he got thrown in that situation, I suppose, that is the one, would you agree that's probably the biggest talking point so far, is that number 6 role? Is it Alexis? Is it Endo? Is there someone else lined up? Because at the moment in time, it does feel like it's Alexis' role, and I think it's fair to say he's been a little bit up and down at times.
Yeah, I think he's been, I wrote today that he's been a 6 in terms of performance levels as well as position. So, you know, that 6 is not terrible, fair, but I think it feels a little bit like it's still being figured out by Liverpool. Not necessarily the personnel, but just the way it works. And I think it's so different, isn't it? You know, you couldn't really, if you were asking for chalk and cheese in terms of number 6s, I think Fabinho and Alexis Mac Allister are not far off that comparison. So Liverpool have been so used to playing with Fabinho in that role and having certain things from him and being able to rely on certain attributes of his, even if he wasn't playing particularly well for periods last season. To go from that to having someone like Alexis Mac Allister, it's a big change. So it means that, you have to, the centre-backs maybe have to be a bit more comfortable wrapping balls in and playing those bounce passes, or they have to, be a bit more aware of aerial duels and Fabinho was obviously excellent in that regard. Maybe the sort of fullbacks can't be as high because the ball's being a bit shorter. There isn't maybe that range or vice versa. So I think there's still things that are being figured out. I think Sunday was one that, Mac Allister is culpable for the first goal, but he's by no means alone. Van Dijk doesn't do him any favours. Alisson doesn't do him any favours in terms of, usually that just that's one of them where Alisson gathers that ball and everyone sort of says, calm down, sorry about that, and you move on. I think maybe what's been the most, if you're picking holes in where Liverpool look vulnerable, it's when they're being run at. And Mac Allister in particular is part of that. I think Trent's part of that. I think Joel Matip's part of that, where you're looking and saying, if someone gets, Neto, we saw obviously in the Wolves game, but you see Baleba and Adingra on Sunday. We've seen a little bit of Bissouma and players like that, recently in games where you think, if they get a little bit of a little bit of space to run, Liverpool still look a little bit too easy to get at. I think they've been a lot better in that regard. I do, especially when Curtis was playing and Szoboszlai. And I was a little bit surprised that it was not Gravenberch. It was Elliott on Sunday. So I think that's still something that needs to be worked out. I think it's definitely improved. And I had a look at Mac Allister's stats now, because I thought, you can sort of, your eye test can tell you that, he's really sort of struggling to impose himself on games, and he's doing this. Actually, look, he's in the top 10 for passes per 90 minutes. He's in the top 10 for ball recoveries. Interceptions, he actually made the most interceptions of anyone on the pitch on Sunday, including one in the build-up to Liverpool's equaliser. And I think there's something else as well, blocks as well. So he's doing his defensive work. He is getting through it, and he is capable of doing it. I think maybe there's just those one-on-one moments where you think a battle of strength, or a little burst of acceleration, maybe he's a little bit too easy to beat. But I think we've seen enough from him, in my opinion, to see that he's a very smart player. He's a very adaptable player. He's a very diligent player, and I think he'll get better as he goes on. I'll be interested to see whether it continues in this role. I have a feeling it probably will, because I think if Wataru Endo was going to be sort of the man, I think he'd be it by now. I think Liverpool would have put him into the Premier League, and said, right, this is how we're going to play. Curtis was suspended in this game, and he didn't put Endo in. He took him off in the Union game on Thursday, and everyone thought he was going to start. He didn't. He brought in Harvey Elliott, and he said it was because of the way he trained and the way he'd looked in recent weeks. So it suggests to me that we'll carry on seeing Alexis Mac Allister, although maybe not against Everton in the next game, because I think he's got another long away trip with Argentina. I think they play Peru on the early hours of Wednesday morning, so he's not back till the early hours of Thursday. So I think we might see an Endo or a bit of a change in the midfield for the next game.
I suppose the Endo thing, that's what it's to touch upon that, is that we saw this, it might be that we saw with Fabinho, it took him till about this time to get in the team and get himself sorted, and he just kind of fudged it until at that point in time, albeit with different players. Obviously Jordan was still about and helping with that role. It might be that, but also like the fact that he didn't play him at Wolves was probably more so actually than Brighton. I actually think the Wolves one where Mac Allister had just got off an airplane and was straight in and was clearly done in, like he could just have stayed away. And like I say, I think there are times where you want, if you're a ball playing six, for lack of a better word, there are times to do. When we saw the value of that, his assist at home was at West Ham to Darwin is the perfect example. But Liverpool, and they've got 4 games coming up. Again, we mentioned maybe the derby and then games that they probably could do with that. But if you go away to a top side, and I actually think Brighton's one of the 4 toughest games Liverpool will play with. Brighton away, that's where you might expect someone. If you're going to have a DM, like a defensive DM, that might be the time to pick him. Is this more than, I don't know if indictment's the right word, is this more they don't quite fancy Endo, or they just really want Alexis Mac Allister on the pitch?
I think more so the latter than the former. I think what's clear, and listen, we should point out, and hat tip to Michael Reid for this, Liverpool had more possession than Brighton, more XG. That's very rare for teams going to the Amex. So they clearly had a plan that they were going to be brave and they were going to play out. They weren't going to sort of, it felt to me, I don't know if it felt to you at the time, but it felt like they were a lot less gambly with their passes. There was far fewer of those sort of reaches into the corners and sort of getting them turned. They felt like they were really determined to play through and be willing to do that. Even when they were under the pump at 1-0 down, and even when they were sort of hanging on a little bit in the second half, there was still a bravery for that. And Alexis Mac Allister is key to that. Obviously, he's a different type of player. And listen, Endo actually, I think, has done really well in the last 2 games I've seen him. The first half against Union, the game against Leicester.
I thought he bossed that Spurs.
He came on. You did, you're right. He came on in a and sort of had a real positive impact on the game, didn't he? When he came off, albeit in crazy circumstances, of course. But he isn't yet at that speed of, listen, the 2 games he's done, it was championship opposition and a Belgian sort of side in the Europa League. So it's a big step to do that against Brighton. Yeah. I think the other thing as well, a little bit, is what we're talking about number 6s. I think there's been a little bit of a sign this season that number 6s are having to do a little bit more of that kind of thing. You look at Tottenham's, for example, sort of improvement. It's a lot of that's based around not being a destroyer and not having sort of a Fabinho type player in there. It's actually built around players who can take so brave on the ball. They'll take it into their feet and they'll turn and they can beat a press. Basuma's been excellent at that. You obviously see Arsenal. Declan Rice is a bit of everything, really, isn't he? But he's obviously very capable of doing that. You've seen, obviously, Manchester United struggling with that player in there, with Casemiro. I think he's been one of the players who's really struggled in their start of the season. So I think, Newcastle, of course, obviously, the other one I was thinking of was Bruno Guimaraes, another player who's very much of that ilk in terms of, on the ball midfield players. So I think maybe there is a little bit of a change in that sense, or a little bit of a trend towards that. And Brighton, great example of that. I think everyone come away from that with a little sort of mental note to keep an eye on Carlos Baleba and Simon Adingra, 2 players that have been brought in, 19 and 21. They look like they're pretty good, don't they? So I think in terms of Endo, it will take a little bit of time for him to settle, but I think you can say the same for Mac Allister. I think we were all guilty of just assuming, he's Premier League ready, he's straight out the oven and goes in, and you just sort of, you get what you got at Brighton. They're a very specific side, Brighton. They have a very specific way of playing. He's obviously playing a slightly different role to where he played there, but it still takes some adaptation to go from one Premier League club to another. And so maybe we need to give him a little bit of a leeway as well, rather than just saying, well, why isn't he at that immediate level? I think he's done fine generally. He's had a couple of difficult moments. He was unlucky in the Bournemouth game. He was hung out to dry a little bit in the Wolves game. And he was punished for an error in the Brighton game. But I don't have any concerns about Mac Allister long term personally.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that clip from our Journo Insight show. If you want to watch or listen to that entire episode and all the other amazing content we've got over on redmenplus.com, we've got a special offer for you. If you sign up as a yearly captain, use the code BREAK, BREAK. As you do so, you'll get 50% off. So yeah, yearly captain, use the code BREAK. Get 50% off, go and listen or watch the Journo Insight and tons more Liverpool content to keep you entertained over this international break.